lines about myself. I am currently working as the head of strategic alliances and partnerships for Tata Consultancy Services here in Canada. I have been with this organization for about 13 years now. Straight out of college, I've been with the organization ever since, and got an opportunity to work in various roles, ranging from delivery to pre-sales to business development, sales, and now alliances. So fair bit of exposure in my current role where I am. If I interact with the product partners day in and day out, and which gives me a fair bit of idea on how the market is behaving, where we are moving to, what are some of the key things that we are focusing on as an IT industry, and what are some of the key things where our customers are focusing on. So whether we are talking about the banking and financial services, whether we are talking about the energy resources and utilities, or we are talking about the retailers, we're talking about communications, media, and entertainment industry. Looking at the market, looking at the products, looking at what the industry is feeding on gives a very good idea of where we are headed. What are some of the key components among those? And one of those very, very few things that I think are destined to be the key holders of progress in the future is artificial intelligence. Right? I wanted to talk about artificial intelligence, but in itself is such a vast topic that I thought I'll take just a few slides to discuss with you and show you the importance of artificial intelligence and what are some of the key building blocks that brings up this topic today for us, right? So considering the time that we have at hand, right, I'll just start with it. I'll make my screen I hope my screen is visible. If somebody can confirm over a chat or on this. I'll consider that to be a yes, right? Great. So I wanted to talk to you about data, right? As people these days have been, thanks Pramod for confirming that. As people these days have been saying that data is the new oil. That is a very, very powerful statement, which in itself tells us how important this entity is, right? You look at a lot of leading organizations around the world, and they are all having some or the other CXO positions that focuses only on the enterprise data. There are various aspects of managing that data. There are various aspects of using that data. There are various aspects of securing that data. And most importantly, how to consume that data. And I'm talking about data today because we'll be moving on from here on to see how it helps us, right? So if you look at my screen, there's about, Forbes says there are about 95% business experiences that need to manage unstructured data. There are about more than 100 or maybe 150 trillion GB of data that we will have to analyze by 2025. That's the amount of data we're talking about, right? And this number keeps on increasing as we move forward. About 61% of businesses don't have a comprehensive long-term strategy for analytics. That's what McKinsey says, right? About more than 50% of DNA service providers will get disqualified because business knowledge and data management skills they will not have. There are many companies, like I say, right, who have been reporting on CDO roles, and that has increased from 12% in 2012 to 63% in 2018. That's what our own research says. So these are some of the key critical points that says industries across the board are looking at data. Industries across the board are putting a lot of emphasis on data, and they are giving or putting a lot of financial investments in and around data. We'll see in the next few slides how that's translating to business values as such and how AI is helping or building on top of it. Like I said, data is the new oil. This slide of mine says data is the new currency. You see, I've tried to segregate an enterprise or the current landscape into three categories, which is first on your leftmost is enterprise intelligence, the middle portion as the ecosystem intelligence, and the rightmost portion as the universal intelligence. And please do not focus on all of those details up there. It's just to give you a very high level idea of how it's moving. Right? So let's start from the leftmost, right? Wherein an enterprise data is available in a very, very siloed form. This is a very tactical capability where we're talking about things like a data warehouse. We're talking about things like ETL. We're talking about the general SDLC, which is the software development lifecycle. We're talking about things like data mining, which are very, very basic. We need to have a technical capability if we want to harness the power of data and build on it. These are some of the hygiene factors that we need, right? So that's about the siloed part of enterprise intelligence. That's the first basic building block. As we move on our right, this data, which was there in very, very siloed forms, we try to simplify that data. We try to build a strategic vision on top of this data. And we are talking at this level about things like an integrated enterprise data, connecting the different data systems in an organization, connecting different lines of businesses within a vast organization, or in a smaller context, maybe connecting different branches in a college, right? And connecting the data brings together a simplified form of that data. We're setting up a data office, and once that data is there in the systems, it's connected, it's simplified. Then we're talking about things like data security. We're talking about things like data governance. We lay that framework in place. So from the siloed data, we have moved on to the simplified data. We're talking about enterprise, how that enterprise is building an intelligence on its own, of its own data. Now, once this is set up from an enterprise perspective, you have the data, you have it in a tactical form, you have vision for your data on how it's going to move forward, and then you have set up the required governance and security and stuff around it. Then you think about scaling that data and using the ecosystem intelligence to scale that data. We're moving on the third part of it. That is when we start talking about the operational excellence of this data for which we built a strategic vision. So we are talking about things like real-time payments. We're talking about things like real-time data integration. We're talking about things like edge computing. Okay? Just think of a ship which is floating in the deep sea, which is about seven fields of football put together. And it's collecting so much of data every day, every second that needs to be used and analyzed further on. So that's the kind of data operational efficiencies that we're talking about, right? So you can see a lot of buzzwords out there: microservices, rules engine, SOA, and so on and so forth, right? But this is how you scale that simplified data. Next, we're talking about the synergies among this data. So we're talking about the big data ecosystem. right? We're talking about the digital ecosystem as such that we need to use on. So once you have scaled this data, you're talking about the customer experience on this data. How do you take together all of this data and build it into a meaningful customer experience? How do you harness the power of this data to build out revenue out of these things, right? Data is lying everywhere in different forms, but how do you use it per se? And once all of this is done, right, we're talking about the next self-optimized part of this, where we are talking about intelligence as such on this data. That's where we're talking about things like prescriptive maintenance, things like self-healing, things like decision making. So a machine decision making on behalf of what is happening there, right? So quantum computing, reasoning on this data. That's how all of this is built. And I took so much time to talk about all of these ways of different forms of how the data exists so that we can actually talk about what this data can be used for in terms of artificial intelligence, right? And these are some of the buzzwords in whatever form this data can be utilized. As we move forward on the next slide, we'll actually see what's the kind of one-on-one mapping between the way decisions are made in a human ecosystem versus the way decisions are made on a machine ecosystem, which is very important. Right? So I'll move on to the next slide. This is where I was talking about this, the decision making which happens in a human brain versus a decision making that happens in centric environment, about a scientific decision. On the left side of my screen, this is a human centric decision making, wherein the decision is still made by an interface, which we might call as a machine, but the center of that decision still remains human, right? So there is a brain computer interface which can be gesture enabled, which can be a voice enabled interface. You tell Siri to do something and it does for you, right? Which can be guided or assisted. You move your hands and something happens on the screen, right? The door opens and so on and so forth, or self-service analytics. So that's the kind of human-centric decision making where you are giving the machine some cues to do certain things for you. Whereas there are some machine-centric decision making ideas wherein we're talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about deep learning, we're talking about statistical analysis of data, and then that machine takes a decision on behalf of you or for you. A very simple example that I take these days in my daily life, right? I see every day. So there's a city around Toronto, which is very common or famous for Indian settlements called Brampton. And I like to go there for my Indian food always. Once I sit in my car and I ask Tesla, can you take me to my favorite restaurant in Brampton? If it's about 6 p.m. when I ask the car to do this, the first thing that it will try and do is probably go to maps and see what are listed as as my favorite restaurants in that city. The next thing it will try and do is what is the travel time from my current location to that place. The other thing that will also try to do is see that in the time that's left, I mean, it will go and check till what times are these restaurants open. And in the travel time that it will take, will I be able to reach somewhere before that restaurant closes? It will also check if I've been there maybe 5 times earlier, what is the average time I have spent in those restaurants? So will I say if it's 30 minutes, will I be able to reach that restaurant 31 minutes before closing time so that I can have my meal in peace? And if all of these conditions are satisfied, it'll go and check what is the battery status. It will check if I can reach in that battery status to my destination that it thinks is good for me. The other thing it will also check is what is the current weather scenario. If it's like minus 30 degrees, which is very common in winters out here, if it's minus 30 degrees, my battery will last less. So it will check for the weather condition and see if I can actually make this trip to and fro in the given battery. And once all of these conditions are satisfied, it will take a decision for me, start the routing, start the car, and start moving. That is the kind of machine-centric decision making I'm talking about today. And that is the kind of decision. You see, there was a lot of data points that it had to analyze, a lot of behavioral patterns that it had to analyze, a lot of things that it has to think about based on the data about my behavior in the past, about various environmental conditions. And this is a very, very small example of a decision of a machine-centric decision. What we are talking when we talk of artificial intelligence is data zillion times bigger than this, and computational times, which is a few microseconds, right? So you get the power of that artificial intelligence based on data. Right? So that's why I kind of spend some time around the data foundation to give you a glimpse of how that data is being used. Now, we've talked about a lot of things. I try to give you a very simple example from the day-to-day life. I don't want to take a lot of time today. I know we have that constraint. I wanted to talk to you about a real world business problem that we have seen. A real world business problem wherein I think there's a lot of emphasis on actionable intelligence through machines based on data. And so this is about a company which is the largest offshore drilling company in the world. The name starts with S and ends with R, right? So I'm sure you guys will be able to figure that out, right? The largest offshore drilling company in the world with a revenue of around 22 billion US dollars. It had a lot of business challenges in terms, and this is a live case that I worked on a few months back, right? So it had a lot of challenges in terms of investments in the technology that it wanted to make, in terms of capacity, in terms of collaboration and teamwork, how to bring all of that ecosystem together. But the end goal, right? If you talk about the focus areas, the end goal of any business is to make money for its shareholders. Their end goal was also to make money, but to make money in a way which was sustainable. So they wanted a favorable revenue mix for demand-led growth in oil and gas, digital enablement, investment in low carbon energy, and so on and so forth. So favorable revenue mix, but an increase in revenue and market share. They also wanted a margin expansion through operating leverage. So they wanted to cut down on their cost while they are increasing the output, while they are increasing the revenue, and to make more margins on that revenue so that eventually they can make more profit. And then they also wanted the digital leadership. They did a lot of work with us. They did a lot of work with one of the hyperscalers or the clouds, as we call it. AI and ML side of it. They were very fantastic offerings on oil and gas, right? They wanted to transform cloud. They wanted to use a lot of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity into energy technology solutions. So just to give you a perspective, this company has a lot of rigs down at offshores, right, in deep seas. But much before they establish those rigs, they have to do a lot of exploration in deep seas. And for different companies, they do that, right? So they have their ships floating in deep seas, collecting a lot of data, analyzing that data to figure out what is the subsurface where they can actually go and find oil with high precision, because they are really capital intensive drillings. So when they make that decision on based on the data that they have collected, and we're talking about multiple GBs of data, right? Humongous data sets. So when they make that decision on the data, collection of that data, right? If you put 2,000 people working 24/7, right, they might not be able to analyze that data in 1 year. But this kind of analysis happens in a few days. The interpretation of that analysis might take a few more days or few more weeks, but that is the kind of things that we're talking about. Right? So that's what we're talking about, right? I just wanted to give you a perspective of how this data is being used and leveraged. This is to enhance their efficiency and reliability, to leverage the computational power, to leverage efficiency and insights, and so on. If you look at here, what this data is probably used for in terms of AI is defect detection in the real world scenario and enhancing the quality of those operations, ensuring safety, reducing production and maintenance cost, voice chatbots, and then there are some AI powered robots that they use. There are some AI powered drones that they use where human cannot reach. They are using drones these days to have surveillance and exploration based on AI. And this has been a game changer for them in the industry. So that is the kind of inputs that are going into this industry these days. It's just a peek into what AI and what data can do, but there's a lot more that can be explored. And I would encourage you to move forward and look into all of these things. Of the Google enablers that I want. At any point in time, if you have any questions, and if you want to understand more about some of these real world scenarios, you can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can be found easily with my name out there. But with you, and thank you for having me here today. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Rohit. It's nice. I'm audible, Rohit?
Yes, Ankur, I can
Hello.
hear you.
Yeah, this is Ankur this side. So session is very good and audience are very eagerly waiting to listen you. So what's the time constant? We have to miss this session right now. So thank you, Rohit. Special thanks because you very come in last time. So thank you, Rohit. I will call you later. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.